You wanted to talk about 1984 last time. Can you describe the book to me as someone who's familiar with it, who's heard of it, but who hasn't exactly read it or listened to the audiobook?
You've never read 1984?
I know, right?
Wow. No, I mean
Well,
there's a lot of people who haven't read it, so you're in good company, but it always shocks me because it's such a ubiquitous book and so many people know it and reference it, and to the point where a lot of people even think there's a reason why George Orwell wrote it, and then people have been using it and teaching it, and that's because they want us to sort of like get used to the ideas and like start to accept that that's the way our future is going to be, almost like this pre sort of programming. So if that's true, that would be a worrisome idea, right? But it's not that. It's not actually, that everybody has known it or understood it. And so I don't know, but it's an awesome book, and just from a standpoint of literature, and it's well done. George Orwell's a master. He's a really intelligent guy, and as a criticism of communism and socialism, it's a great book as well, because it really highlights all of the suffering that would happen to humanity if they're under this communist, supposedly utopian regime, which is never actually utopian in practice. And especially highlighted in this book is the division between people and relationships that, can't be allowed because they're not controllable. Love is not controllable. Family relationships are not controllable. And that you see that, right? But you see that even right now being highlighted by some of the movements that are going on. They're literally Black Lives Matter calls for the abolition of the family unit because it's racist. Supposedly it's a white foundation, which is silly. It's silly. We've had families in all cultures, all continents, throughout eternity. So to call it white and racist is very strange. But when you realize that Black Lives Matter is actually a communist movement, then it makes a lot of sense why they're calling for the abolition of the family. And in 1984, the family there are families technically, but they're definitely not families like we would imagine them. There's no love, there's no trust, there's no any connection really. It's all about turning each other in and spying on each other and undermining each other. And in fact, if you are thought to have a loving connection with your spouse, you would be divided, and then a new spouse would be like installed. So it's really interesting to look at it that way. And another thing that, communism promises to destroy, which people don't realize and which 1984 highlights, is the religious and spiritual aspects of being a human, which we all have. We all have that spark in us, that yearning, no matter whether we're materialists even, I think, have it in their way too. They have things that they have faith about. They have things that they are in awe and wonder about, So I think there's that same sort of stirring, even if it's not specifically religious. Or specifically spiritual. I think it's that same sort of thing. And in 1984, they, completely, again, it's almost like it's abolished, it's banned. And in place of the spiritual urge, they have something called the 2 minutes hate and hate week. And these are sort of religious experiences where people come together and share their hate and scream and throw things at the enemy. And, it's unifying. You're unifying against a common enemy, and you're getting that experience of like group cohesion and this very powerful emotion. And it's sort of to take the place of that religious and spiritual urge that we have. And when you look at communist regimes and movements in action, that is one of the things that they promise to eradicate is religion, period, and spirituality. And so I tell people, like, I used to be a communist. And I used to agitate for communist revolution. And I thought that was a great idea. You remember? Yeah. 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 And I was pretty strongly opinionated about that, obviously, because I was like out in the streets doing it. Mm-hmm. And the thing that broke me of it was when I realized that they would literally imprison and re-educate religious or spiritual people. And I was like, wait a second, what? Like, what are we doing out here? It's like that Family Guy where the guy's in prison and he like stabs himself and he's like, oh my God, what have I been doing to people this whole time? Yeah. See, I'm like, I felt like that, I was like, what have I been doing this whole time? Been very destructive, actually. Like, people have to be spiritual. I think that's one of my own deeply held aspects of self, which always has been, is my connection to my spirituality, and Yeah. So 1984 highlights that as well. So it's a good book because it highlights the sort of the worst aspects of communism and socialism. And people think that it's all just, you know, sharing and making sure people have food and making sure no one's like the elite, like with their boot on the rest of us poor plebs. And that all sounds really good. But when you look at what it really is and what it actually calls for, there's nothing good about it.
Well, I've said this many times. In middle school, I was reading a philosophy book. It was a whole history of philosophy and the great ideas. And I actually did get to Marx, and, you know, I was reading his philosophy. I'm like, wow, this is really great. This is a really great idea.
Sounds good.
This sounds really good. This is probably the best idea ever. Too bad that it doesn't work in practice, because essentially what I understood is it's ultimately flawed and designed to self-destruct. Like, if I don't want to go too much into it, but if you kind of read Marx, if you understand his philosophy, you do realize, you know, it's a wonderful philosophy, but in practice it's horrifying.
And in practice, it always installs, and this is known and promoted in communism and socialism, that you're installing a dictatorship. And they call it the dictatorship of the proletariat, which sounds good again. You're like, oh, cool. So regular people will be able to just say what happens and it happens. And we all have been oppressed for so long. And so we'll finally get to just like make things how we want them to be. And it feels so good. And then you think about it and you're like, wait, who is actually going to carry out the dictatorship? Because this is what you're going to have. You're going to have a dictatorship supposedly of the proletariat that's never been in a communist situation where they actually go through and poll 100% of the proletariat and say, all right, what do you guys decide? All right, that's what, you know, you have the dictatorship, so that's it. It's never like that. It's like whoever the person is, the leader who's installed, they're the dictator. And this, supposedly they're doing this for your best interest, but so is every dictator all throughout history. So is every tyrant all throughout history. So it's crazy that we're like working towards installing a dictator supposedly for our benefit. That's insane. That's insanity.
Well, there's like something, it's sort of a retort. There's two retorts, but whenever I hear somebody say, hey, I just want what's best for the people, I usually say one of two things. Like, one is, so did Jesus Christ, and look what happened to him. And two, I say, and it's like, the other thing is like, hey, I just want what's best for the people. And I'm like, so did Hitler.
Yeah. Well, that's a thing, right? That people don't necessarily think about the fact that every single villain, every single person that we look at and we say, those are the baddies, there they are. They all think they're doing the best thing and the right thing. That doesn't mean they think they're doing no harm. Some people think harm is the right thing, right? But they think they're doing the right thing and the best thing. So yeah, you're totally right.